I am a North Carolinian, born in Wilmington, North Carolina, but shortly after that, my father went into the ministry. He was a Methodist minister, and we moved to Salisbury. I've lived in Salisbury 3 different occasions. At that time, I was 5 years old, and I didn't remember a whole lot other than going across the street to Monroe Street School and the classes there, and then on the weekends going to Belmont, where my father actually pastored. He was a student at the Hood Theological Seminary, and he pastored in Belmont, so we would travel. Then from that, we moved away. He had a church first in Belmont and then in Ithaca, New York. And then in 1962, we moved back to Salisbury, where he pastored at Soldiers Memorial. I went to school here. I was one of the first ones the first one to integrate Knox Junior High School. And my brother and sister went to Borden High School. And of course, I was there at Knox and then graduated at Borden High School. I was actually the last class of Borden High School, because after my class graduated, then there was total desegregation, and Price High School closed, and so Borden High School was called Salisbury High School. I went to college, and when I graduated, I started working in Louisville, Kentucky, working in a bank. But then the Lord called me into the ministry. And so then I wound up moving back to Salisbury again to go to Hood Theological Seminary myself and get my degree. And so since that time, I have been pastoring. We left Salisbury again, went to Landis, then we went to Charlotte, then we went to Detroit, and then came back to the area. And so now I'm pastoring Soldiers Memorial AME Zion Church, just as my father pastored. So it's been a good run. I thank the Lord. I thank God for the opportunity to be a pastor. Out of all the 3 children that my parents had, I probably would have been the least likely to be a pastor. But God has a sense of humor, and He called me, and I'm glad that He called me into this ministry. My memories of Salisbury, first memories, I was 5 years old, and so all I remember is just going across the school, playing in the yard around us. The second time when we moved from Ithaca, New York, back to Salisbury, was very interesting because when we came back, I remember us driving to the parsonage on 212 West Liberty Street, and we went by Fulton Street, and at that time the YMCA was there. And I said, at that time, I said, "Oh boy, we've got a YMCA right up the street." And it kind of got quiet because my brother and sister and my parents knew that even though it was there, that it was closed to, at that time, coloreds. We moved into the house, and right across the street was the Trailway bus station. And in there, of course, you had your section for white and your section for colored. And so I had to be introduced to segregation and Jim Crow. So when coming back to Salisbury, I was introduced to that again. As a child, it was whole different. I didn't know anything about that. But coming back, got an opportunity to experience it here in Salisbury. So that's what I remember about Salisbury. I remember the segregation. There was a restaurant right across the street from us, but as a African American, you couldn't go into the restaurant. You could go to the back door, to the window, to the kitchen, and you could order your food from there. And I remember that the Anderson family never went to that back window. My parents would not allow us to have to go to be served through a window, so we didn't go there. I had an opportunity after my first year at back in Salisbury. I went to Monroe Street School. I was in the 6th grade and looking forward to going to Price High School. My brother and sister went there. But my parents sat down and talked to the three of us, and they asked us if we would go to my brother and sister Boyden High School, and I would go to Knox Junior High School. And of course, they expressed the significance of that, of desegregating society and playing a part in desegregation. So I went to Knox Junior High School. And I was the first and only black person that was there when I was at Knox. So it was an adjustment. The funny thing about it, again, as I mentioned earlier, out of all 3 children, I would be the one least likely to be considered going into the ministry. At the same time, I would be the least candidate to integrate a school, because I had a little rough time in school. I can remember having fights all the time, especially when you move from one neighborhood or one city to another. You're the new kid on the block, and people test you out. And I didn't deal with that too well, so I got in fights a lot. So I wasn't a good candidate for representing the African American community at that time, but I knew I had to be on my best behavior. So I went and had a good time at Knox Junior High School. There are persons that befriended me, and so I didn't have any problems. There are a few things that stand out, though. One thing that stood out is the fact that at that time we had gym, and we would participate, change clothes, put on our gym clothes, and afterwards we would take a shower and put our clothes back on. And when I took my clothes off, it looked like people were looking at me to see if I really had a tail, because some people would say that black folks had tails. And so they stared at me. So I had to deal with that, and I had to deal with some other things. And I understood there was a difference. So that when I was with the boys, young men, we talked and we were friends. I had friends, and we got along, classmates. But when it came to the females, I knew that I couldn't talk to females. That when they talked about the girls in the class, I could just listen. But there was a barrier in terms of a black person doing Jim Crow and doing segregation that is almost forbidden. In some communities, it's forbidden for you to even look at a white girl or a white woman. And so I understood that. And I didn't have, at that time, any problems with it. But I knew that's the way things were. And there's some things that we understood. We didn't like it, we didn't agree with it, but you had to deal with it. Some people didn't like it and they rebelled against it, and it created problems. I remember a friend of ours, he was younger than I was, that was a member of Soldiers Memorial, part of the Tracy family. Ed Tracy had a taxi service, and he had, sons and daughters. And the youngest son was kind of over, this hefty little fella. Unfortunately, one day he was killed. He had a little white friend, and they got along, but they had a little argument one day after they got off the bus, and his friend went to his parents and told them, and the father of the young fella came out with a gun. And as I forgot, Tracy's first name. But when he saw him with the gun, he started running, and the guy shot him in the back. And then as he was laying on the ground, he was pleading for his life, and then he shot him again and killed him. And I remember that was a very tense time during the period here in Salisbury, because we had a trial, and the African-American community was very angry. And we wanted to make certain that there would be justice. And I think, I still, at that time, I was a teenager, a young teenager. So I didn't understand everything that was going on, but I do know that the leadership of our community met with, the leaders in Salisbury met with our leaders in an effort to make certain there wasn't a riot or something that would happen. But our leadership wanted to make certain that there was justice. And we really don't think it was justice. I think they found him guilty, but by insanity or something like that. And we knew what that meant, that he'd probably go to some institution for a little while and then they would let him go. But we were concerned and hurtful that there wouldn't be justice, that we didn't trust that there would be justice, that he would receive whatever normal verdict that he would have received if he had shot a white boy. So that's what we had to deal with. The other thing that I remember too is that the grown adult African Americans during that time were called by their first name. And Johnny or whatever, Susie, not in an affectionate way, but because of their place in society. Didn't matter how old they were still called by their first name. And one thing I realized being a preacher's kid, I mostly saw everybody at church. And when they were at church, they dressed up. And when they were in church, they were Mr. and Mrs. or Miss, respected. And so in my early years, that's really the only time I saw them, for the most part, because I was going to school. But when I became older and started moving about and in the community and working myself, I noticed it more. That when I would see them during the week, they'd have their work clothes on. Like I said, they'd be called by their first name. But then on Sunday, they would dress up, and everybody was Mr. and Mrs., and people were treated with respect. And I remember that, and I have kept that even to today as a pastor, because society's changed a little bit, and the younger crowd, they don't like to have to dress up to go to church. There's a crowd now that doesn't have segregation and discrimination over their head like the crowd before, so they don't mind being called by their first name. That's a way of showing friendship and respect in that way. So as a pastor, I'm a little outdated because people always want to know why I'm wearing a suit. I still have problems calling my members by their first name because I'm used to calling people with a title and showing respect for them. So that's part of the old and the new, and I'm making that adjustment. I call some people by their first name, but I still feel more comfortable. And people say, why you gotta wear that suit all the time? Because again, that's what I came up with. Even when I worked at the bank, I remember one day it was real hot, like in 90-degree weather, and the air conditioner broke down, and so we were in the office, we took our coats off and we were working, and the president kind of walked by, waved at everybody. And then the next thing I knew, all of the heads of the department started going to his office. And then when they came back, the word was, the president said, put your coat back on. It doesn't matter how hot it is, you wear your coat. So I got used to that. And another thing I said, if I did that in the secular world, then I'll have to do at least that in the church, where I show respect for the Lord and want to wear my best. And then also as a pastor, you represent the congregation. And so I feel like I need to represent the congregation the best way I can. I never know when I may have to, go to the courtroom and just be a character witness, or I may have to go to the mayor's office or somewhere for a meeting. And so I want to dress my best. And the other thing too is that I do have an earned doctorate, but titles don't mean that much to me. I'm still Derrick Anderson, but I remember my wife telling me, you earned it, and it was a struggle, and you honor your family by being called Dr. Anderson. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And then another time in a community, one of the community organizations I was working with had a press conference, a news conference. And so during the news conference, I got up and introduced myself as Reverend Anderson. And after the news conference, the director came up to me and said, "Why did you say Reverend Anderson? You should have said Dr. Anderson. That's why we wanted you here. We wanted to know that we're legitimate, So I do that even now. I still, if people want to call me pastor, that's fine. But I still, if they ask who I am, I'll say Dr. Anderson, because I don't know who I'm representing at that time, and I don't know what the importance might be for me to say that. But I still do that. And in terms of working with people, being back, in Salisbury is a good opportunity for me, because now I knew a lot of people during the Jim Crow time, doing segregation, and I'm meeting them, and all of us are a lot older, and I still see that there's work to do. I understand that congregation where I am from being a young person, and now I'm a senior citizen with my AARP card and getting my discounts. And to me, it's a wonderful opportunity to just keep some healing and to continue to build relationships in the community. Well, Jim Crow laws had to do with mainly segregation. It was, during that time, it was a fight to even be considered a full human being. That for some people, we weren't even fully humans. This evolution would say that we were lower than other human beings. We were kind of somewhere between the ape and human beings. So we had to fight that. We had to fight the fact that we were, number one, human beings with a soul. Some even said we didn't have souls. So we had to fight that. We had to fight for having rights as a citizen. What the Constitution said we had, that we actually had those rights. So we had to fight for those rights, fight the right to vote, the right to own property, those kind of things. And so that's part of Jim Crow. The other part of Jim Crow is like in the justice system. If someone said a black man killed somebody, it seemed as though the justice system didn't care which black man, just as long as a black man was lynched for that. And then sometimes you didn't get to the courtroom because of lynching. So lynching was a reality. Segregation was a reality. It's in that same Greyhound bus station, you had the colored water fountain. Not only had you had the colored section, the colored water fountain, the colored restroom. So everything was separate between white and black. And in some settings, you couldn't look a white person in the eye. You had to they expect you to look down. So that's a part of what we had to go to. It was a very dangerous time. There are places, even here in Salisbury, that you didn't go because the reputation was that you might enter that community, but you might not come out of that community. So your life there was always a threat to your life in terms of moving through society. You were always considered inferior. The beautiful thing, though, about the African American schools, not only that they knew how to teach, they knew how to teach with little resources. The books weren't the same books. The Board of Education wouldn't give us the same textbooks as the other for boy in high school or white schools. They got a better textbook. We got a lesser textbook, so that the teachers, the good teachers, would bring in other materials. I remember being in the 6th grade. My teacher, Mr. Johnson, he separated the class based on what he saw our ability. And so there was kind of more like the general population of the class, but then there were those that he felt that they had ability. And so he would give us more work and expect more from them. When I got here and I left Ithaca, I was a C student, a C- student. And I can remember Mr. Johnson pulling me aside. And this was also during the time of corporal punishment. So he had belts and paddles. And he sat me down and he says, "Derrick, you're more than a C student. And I expect more from you." And he said, "The first time I received a test from you, or homework from you, that was less than a B, I would pull you, I'd give you the belt or the paddle, whatever it is." So he threatened to do that. And all of a sudden, I became an A and B student, just overnight. I don't know what happened. I don't know if the angels from heaven came down, but all of a sudden, I became an A and B student. And he pushed me and made certain that I did my best. The other thing that they did is they prepared us for society, that all of us had to represent our race of people. And we had to represent it in a positive way, that we had to make certain that we broke the stereotypes of being ignorant, stupid, lazy, whatever that stereotype was. We had to break that. And they made certain that we looked good too. If there was a student there that came to class and the clothes were dirty or something like that, they weren't taking care of themselves, they pull that person aside and they make certain they are right at that school that child looked presentable. And so that's how the black community reacted to that. But it was just two different societies. And you didn't, when you left, you never knew what might happen. Because any kind of contact with a white person, if they could claim anything on you. And so you had to, that's the tension that we lived in. And again, it started when I came here, when we moved from Ithaca, and I said, "Whoa, boy, we got a YMCA right up the street." And I said, "No, you can't go there." On the road, when we traveled, and we would travel from Salisbury to Kentucky, because our grandparents on my father's side lived there. And that was a little dangerous too, because we knew you couldn't stop anywhere. I mean, you could stop and get gas, but you couldn't stop and use anybody's facility. You couldn't stop and eat there. You couldn't stop and go in one of the hotels or motels at the time. So that trip, we had to pack up everything, food and everything. And at that time too, highways used to have picnic tables, picnic areas, so you'd stop there. But you couldn't stop to use the restroom or go to any kind of hotel. When being Methodist, we have an annual conference. And so when the annual conference was in Salisbury, and that soldiers, those who traveled from out of town, we'd have to have members of our church that would allow them to stay in their house because they couldn't stay in a hotel. So that was kind of what Jim Crow was all about. Again, it was a dangerous time. I can remember I was dating my wife at that time, and she lived in Spencer, and I lived on the west side of Salisbury. And I had taken her out that night, and I decided to take a shortcut going back home, and I looked and realized I was running out of gas. And here it was at nighttime. I was in a white community, almost running out of gas. And it was a scary situation. And I thank the Lord for his grace that I found my way out and made it back to the house. But those things you had to always be aware of. And you always realize you had to let people know, you had to break the stereotypes by the way you worked. I worked at, there used to be a place called Phil's Shoe Store in downtown. Some of the Simpsons, there was a family called the Simpsons, I think they were professors, and their son, I think was the first black person to work at Phil's Shoe Store. And he went to college, and I remember someone approaching me about taking that job because they said they were looking for a good black person to work at Phil's. So I wound up working at Phil's Shoe Store. Yeah. There was a lot of mistreatment, injustice during Jim Crow, a lot of tragedy, a lot of painful situations. Some of the older saints of the church really handled it beautiful. They were stern, they were willing to fight for their rights, but also they treated people the way people needed to be treated. If I were to speak to some of those persons, first of all, I would let them know that I'm not harboring any ill will towards them. I don't appreciate what they've done. They took a friend away from me. They've created a lot of anguish and pain in many lives. And as a preacher, I would hope that they could reach that point where they would seek God's forgiveness. They have my forgiveness, but they would seek God's forgiveness. The other thing too is that I would, being back in Salisbury, just being a human being, I think is important to for people to be able to learn to get along with each other, get to know each other. The key is that, especially in politics, if a person's from a different political party, we paint that the other party as being the evil, the antichrist almost. And so there's a lot of division even in the world period. In the United States, there's natural division that comes from socioeconomic groups. And so there's so many barriers. And this is important to me in terms of racial relationship. But also, you're always going to have discrimination based on many factors. And it's important for us to work through that. In one way, we appreciate St. Luke because you guys have reached out. This is a project that you want to help people to get along and to be able to, not just from a surface, but to have real relationships. And to have a real relationship, we have to be able to talk with each other. We have to be able to not only talk about the good things, not just talk about the weather, but talk about some of our experiences. Soldiers and St. Luke had the opportunity where we shared each other's story. And I thought that was a good way to start. A lot of times we don't know each other's story. Even people of the same racial group, same socioeconomic group, really don't know their story. And I think knowing people's story is a baseline for knowing who they are and why they think the way they think. And it gives us an opportunity to start that process of taking steps that will help us to respect each other, will help us to find forgiveness, to help us to deal with any bitterness, any root of bitterness that still might be in our hearts. But that's a step. And I feel like the last days that I have, God put me here at Salisbury for a reason, and that might be one of those reasons to help that community really get to that point where we we're one and we respect each other. We found out it's not that way in our society. And I think, as I've said before, with the civil rights era, which I feel is very important, during that era, they made certain laws. They tried to legislate us through laws out of Jim Crow. And so you have to pass a law saying you have to let African American people come, you have to do this. And so it was done, but even when it was done with some hostility. I remember when I pastored in Landis at Sandy Ridge, across the street from the church is Landis Elementary. Well, it used to be Agri Memorial. It used to be an all African American school. And so while we were there, we found out that there was a room, someone saw a room where we had all of the old trophies, all of the memorabilia from the school in a back room, and they were getting ready to throw that away. So our history, when desegregation came, much of our history was thrown away. There's no more Price High School. There's no more Dunbar. Some of the names of people that meant a lot to us, they don't exist anymore. And some of the teachers, the educators, didn't receive the kind of respect that they needed. And I still think that there are schools that really don't know how to teach African Americans, especially African American boys. We're a challenge. We're a challenge. But our teachers knew how to handle us. Like Mr. Johnson, when he pointed his finger at me and said, you gotta do better than this. And if you don't do better than this, I've got a belt and I have a paddle waiting for you. And that message got through. We just need to do that. We need to start that process of talking, sharing each other's story, and then getting to the point where we can respect each other for who we are, and we can respect each other's opinions without getting angry with each other. Let me just say this. I think, again, this project that you have, St. Luke, we appreciate that. We're in a nation that's used to big names, big projects, and famous people. But it's the everyday people that really make this nation and this world work. And so there are people that don't have a big name we sit right next to in church, and that person is making a significant contribution to society. And I think us little people, the big names, they come in, that's great. But it's the little people that here every day, we get up out of bed the same way and so forth. When we learn how to get along with each other, that'll make a tremendous difference. I'm a sports fan, and so I'm kind of rooting for the Toronto team to beat Golden State, because Golden State has all of these Warriors that have these stars, these great stars in the league, these names, and Toronto doesn't have those big stars, but they have one star who they say is boring because he doesn't say too much, but every game he scores the baskets that need to be scored. He does everything that he needs to do, and he is a talented a player as any of the big name players. And so in our society, we're into those big names, but there are a lot of so-called little people that society would call us little people. They can make a big difference, and we're the ones that keep the foundation of this nation going, and we'll always be the ones that do that. So I just hope that everybody realizes that they have a part to play, and the part that you're playing is very valuable and is very meaningful for not only Salisbury, but just for humanity in general. In terms of just the everyday person their role in helping make this a better society and overcoming some of the discriminations and the divisions that the nation and society has. I think that first of all, that individual needs to understand that they have a role to play, whatever that role is. If it's that I come in contact with 10 people, I'm riding on the bus and I come in contact with people, that the way I treat those individuals can make a difference. And that we need to learn to value each other. And we need to learn to be honest with each other also. Sometimes you can't be honest because you're in a setting that people really don't want to hear the truth. But it really does matter that whatever abilities God has given me, that I first of all use those abilities. If I'm in a situation and I see something that's not right, that I do what I can do to help out, that I'm as valuable as anybody else is. And I just need to make certain that I value other people and do what I can in my own little corner to help make the world better. And I would say that for anyone. All of us come in contact with each other, with people, and we're not just here for ourselves. That's part of our faith, that we understand the world doesn't evolve around us, but God put us here for a reason. And we need to hopefully find that relationship with the Lord to help us to know ourselves better. But whatever opportunities we have to help someone, whatever opportunities we have to respect someone, and to help facilitate people working through problems and conflicts, that all of us need to do that. So for some people, it might be no more than trying to find a candidate that they research and feel like that candidate can make a difference. But whatever is available to us, we need to take advantage of that. For people to get along with each other, truth is important. And as I mentioned, we struggle with the truth. The Bible tells us that if we continue in the Lord and His way and allow Him to teach us, we will learn the truth, and the truth will set us free, or the truth will make us free. Being able to tell the truth is a difficult thing. I might walk in here with a big plaid suit on, and I look like Bozo the Clown, and I walk up to you and say, how do you like my new suit? And the natural thing for most people is not to tell the truth, but to say, oh, that looks wonderful, okay? So it becomes a challenge, but at the same time, telling the truth is a challenge. How can you tell me the truth about my outfit without hurting my feelings? Because obviously I have a problem with taste and dress. So how can you respect me? How can you be truthful with me and tell the truth and not help me to walk around looking foolish and nobody? And what I tell my congregation is, pray to God or put words in your mouth or show you how you can tell the truth, okay? So you may not say, Derrick, that suit looks crazy, or you look like Bozo the Clown. But you can say, well, that's interesting. The color scheme is kind of interesting. If you're in charge of a program, you can say that's not really the color code for this program. I mean, the code, dress code. But somehow we have to find out how we can say the truth. Ask the Lord to help me to share the truth, because there's a part of me that will say something that's hurtful. There's a part of me where I love my own opinion. There's a part of me that might be a bit arrogant and insensitive. So I've got to work on my relationship with the Lord in terms of asking the Lord to help make me humble, but also help me to be truthful about myself, and then in being truthful about myself, I can learn how to be truthful with other people. Because there are things that I don't about myself that I really would not want to know. And when I find out about it, it brings, it's painful. But the beauty of it is the God that we serve is a loving God. And whenever he convicts us of behavior, he's always there with his love to forgive us and to show us how to be right with him. And so I would say probably the first thing is that we have to reach that point where we can be honest with ourselves. And if once I learn how to be honest with myself, or as I'm learning how to be honest with myself, it'll help me to learn how to be honest with other people. And so when I see something and I may want to say something that's demeaning or hurt that person's feeling, I can think about how I felt when I had to come to grips with a part of my personality that wasn't right with God and I knew wasn't right. And when I think about that experience of working through that and how difficult it was and how painful it was, then I can use that as a reference point to be able to know how to treat other people and maybe treat them with more respect and with more compassion than I would have, because I know the struggle that I went through trying to be truthful with myself.